and Chris Holmes News. I'm Irene.
And I'm Raven. Today, many new discoveries about Australia's Great Barrier Reef have surfaced in the world of science. Let's take a look, shall we?
The Great Barrier Reef is part of the coral reef biome, and I would say is the largest living structure and most diverse biome on Earth. Let me just name a couple of the living organisms or biotic factors that are found there. Some notable plants are zooxanthellae, algae, and seagrasses. Thousands of species of fish have their habitats here, like the clownfish, coral, sea turtle, moray eel, and manta ray.
Another important biotic factor is symbiosis, which includes mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism.
One example of mutualism is in the clownfish. Clownfish feed on small invertebrates that are otherwise have potential to harm the sea anemone, but the fecal matter of the clownfish provides nutrients to the sea anemone. The clownfish is additionally protected from predators by the anemone's stinging cells, to which the clownfish is immune to.
An example of a parasitism relationship is the pearlfish and the sea cucumbers. The pearlfish detects chemicals given off by the sea cucumbers and enters the sea cucumber when it participates in gas exchange and breathes in water. The sea cucumber attempts to eject the pearlfish by expelling most of their digestive tract out through their anus. This can be detrimental for the sea cucumber.
Although isopods are usually parasitic, there are some species that attach themselves to a fish without damaging tissue. Isopods are external marine parasites which are large enough that they can often be seen with the naked eye. They use complex sucker-like organs to firmly attach themselves to their hosts. The isopods scavenge floating food particles rather than feeding on their hosts, as they would in a parasitic relationship.
How can so many species live together? Too much competition isn't always beneficial.
But they don't. Each species occupies its own niche, which is how an organism or population responds to the distribution of resources and competitors.
Let's not forget the abiotic factors though. They're just as important. Light, for one, is extremely important. All the autotrophic plants, algae, and kelp need light to photosynthesize and provide energy and food for the entire ecosystem. Next, water movement. When water is going back and forth, it will help take away the waste and bring food in. Temperature needs to be just right, and coral reefs need water that is between 64 and 91 degrees Fahrenheit. Here's a video of my trip explaining the temperature's importance.
The brown coloration of healthy coral is due to microscopic algae called zooxanthellae that live within its tissue. The coral has a special relationship with these algae called a symbiotic relationship. The coral acquires food from the algae, and the algae receive a safe place to live. However, if water temperatures rise, corals become stressed, and this relationship begins to break down. The zooxanthellae begin to leave the coral tissue. Without its resident zooxanthellae, the polyp tissue is transparent and the white limestone skeleton beneath becomes visible. This process is called bleaching. The coral polyps, now a ghostly white, are still alive. If normal temperatures return in time, they can recover their symbiotic algae and return to health. However, if the water remains too warm for too long, the polyps will starve and eventually die.
Let's report to reporter Kevin Ting, who is live in Australia.
Here's just a quick basic look at the energy pyramid of the Great Barrier Reef. The main producers, phytoplankton, seaweed, and algae. They provide 100% of the energy in the ecosystem. That doesn't mean that an abundance of algae is good enough though, because it causes an algal bloom and overcrowding of the ecosystem. The herbivores that eat these producers can be zooplankton, snails, and urchins. Next are the consumers, mostly small fish like sea stars and whale sharks. Bigger second-level consumers eat these consumers, and they can be rays or octopi. At the top we have the apex predators, the tiger sharks and the moray eel. Then we have the decomposers, who are not on this pyramid but are just as important. Parrotfish, angelfish, and bacteria help by limiting the establishment and growth of microalgae. They also open up new sites for colonization by coralline algae and corals. Decomposers do much more than we think.
Fascinating, but there's still more, especially when we look at the connections between all these organisms. Oh, what do we have here now, Kevin?
Let's quickly look at this food web, which shows the flow of energy in the Great Barrier Reef. As you can see, one level of consumers is not limited to preying on the level right below it. Organisms can be connected in many different ways. Alrighty, back to you!
Thanks, Kevin. A fun fact about coral reefs. Coral reefs have a very high average primary productivity, about 1,500 to 8,000 grams of carbon per meter square year gross production due to their diverse range of photosynthetic species, but contribute relatively little to the global NPP because they occupy a very small part of the planet.
Let's talk cycles.
The water cycle is the process by which water on Earth goes into the atmosphere and back onto Earth again. The first thing that happens in the water cycle is that when it rains or snows, the rain and snow come from the clouds. The water then goes into the ground, rivers, lakes, and oceans. After this, evaporation happens, which is when the heat from the sun changes the water into gas. The gas then forms and rises, turning into clouds. When the water vapor gets too heavy, it falls to the ground, which is what rain is. If the temperature is very cold, then it will not rain, but instead will snow. The cycle is then completed and it starts all over again. The coral reefs is not affected by the water cycle because the water just evaporates and turns into gas and back to the clouds. The carbon cycle begins with the sun that causes photosynthesis in plants. Coral is the main producer, or autotroph. The coral captures sunlight and turns it into energy, releasing oxygen and other organic products. Organisms then eat the coral, and carbon is transferred from organism to organism further up the food chain. These animals respire, which puts carbon back in the air. When these organisms die, carbon is released. Decomposers feed on the dead organism and help to process organic material that the plant needs. Carbon is constantly cycled in this ecosystem by photosynthesis, feeding, and decomposing. The nitrogen cycle plays an important role in the ecosystem. Coral reefs are sites of high nitrogen fixation activity where marine cyanobacteria are the main contributors. Living organisms possess a large amount of assimilated nitrogen. When they die, nitrogen is released back into the environment using aerobic decomposition. This decomposition process produces large quantities of ammonia through the process of ammonification. Ammonium has several divergent pathways from this point forth. Plant and algae can assimilate ammonia and ammonium directly for the biosynthesis. The remaining bulk of the decomposed byproduct is utilized by bacteria in a process called nitrification. Nitrogen is cycled through the environment and is an important part of the ecosystem.
Thanks again, Kevin.
Breaking news. This is just in. The Great Barrier Reef has been declared endangered. The harsh influence of man combined with various human influence and natural factors have created cause for concern amongst both biologists and conservationist groups who do not want to see this precious natural miracle fall into decline. One of the contributing factors to the reef's beauty, which is simultaneously one of its greatest weakness to threats, is the level of utter dependence each part of the ecosystem has on one another. That is to say that if a single organism or species is affected or declines in numbers, it can have a huge ripple effect down and up through the Great Barrier barrier reef's food chain.
Being such a popular destination for cruises and other sightseers to go through, the Great Barrier Reef sees a huge amount of ocean traffic every year, with the number of resulting collisions and groundings has decreased substantially recently. Their occurrence and the subsequent wreck have an immediate and drastic effect on the surrounding ecosystem as debris and other foreign objects enter the water and remain there for a long period of time. A boat doesn't have to go through the extreme of becoming wrecked to have an effect on the Great Barrier Reef. Instead, the mere act of larger vessels passing through the oceans of the reef can release a substance known as tribulin or TBT, which is used to preserve the condition of ship hulls. TBT is toxic to seawater and can damage marine organisms that it encounters. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park authorities have listed sea turtles, blue whales, and dugongs, more notably known as sea cows, as endangered. Dugongs are particularly at risk because as cave strategists, they breed and nurture young at a slow rate. As the coral bleach and die, the dugongs have no source of food, which are the algae living mutualistically with the coral.
Marine Protected Areas (MPAS) has become increasingly prominent for reef management. MPAS promote responsible fishery management and habitat protection. Much like national parks and wildlife refuge, and to varying degrees, MPAS restrict potentially damaging activities. MPAS encompass both social and biological objectives, including reef restoration, aesthetics, biodiversity, and economic benefits.
Well, that's all we have for you today, and see you next time on CHN.